The story opens with a sight that no one in the city's richest family could ever forget. It was a cold morning in November. The fog hung low over the marble graves, wrapping everything in an eerie silence. When billionaire Richard Harlow walked toward his son's resting place, his heart heavy with the weight of yet another sleepless night, he never imagined the scene that awaited him: a young girl, no older than 20, dressed in a worn gray sweater, kneeling by his son's grave, crying as though she had lost her entire world. He stopped in his tracks. For a long moment, he just stood there, his breath caught in his throat. He recognized every person who came to visit his son, former classmates, family friends, business partners. But this girl, she was a stranger. Her hair was tangled from the wind, her hands trembling as she clutched a tiny bouquet of wilted daisies. Tears fell onto the stone that bore his son's name, Ethan Harlow, beloved son, gone too soon. And in that moment, Richard felt something shift inside him, something that told him this meeting wasn't just coincidence. Pause, as if narrating for a YouTube story. If you were walking through that graveyard that day, you'd never believe what happened next. So before I continue, make sure you like this video and subscribe, because what you're about to hear will remind you how love, loss, and fate are sometimes connected in ways we could never imagine. Richard approached quietly, his polished shoes crunching over the fallen leaves. The girl gasped when she saw him, wiping her eyes quickly. I'm sorry, sir, she stammered, trying to stand. I shouldn't be here. I'll leave. But Richard shook his head gently. No, please, he said, his voice softer than he'd expected it to be. You knew my son. The girl hesitated, her eyes darting away. Yes, sir, she whispered. He was kind to me. Richard studied her carefully. There was honesty in her trembling voice, but also something deeper, pain mixed with guilt. What's your name? He asked. Lila, she said. Lila Carter. Lila, he repeated, his tone thoughtful. How did you know Ethan? The question seemed to break something inside her. She pressed her hand against her mouth, tears flooding again. He saved my life, she choked out. Richard's heart twisted. His son, Ethan, had been gone for almost a year, a car accident that had shattered the Harlow family's world. Ethan was only 23, full of dreams, kindness, and a heart too big for the world he lived in. After the tragedy, Richard had buried himself in work, using his billion-dollar empire to hide from his grief. His wife, Margaret, had left for Europe to find peace, but really, she couldn't bear to see the reminders of their son everywhere. Now, hearing this girl say Ethan had saved her life, it was like opening an old wound and discovering it was still bleeding. Richard motioned for her to sit with him on the bench beside the grave. The fog thinned a little, sunlight breaking through faintly. Tell me, he said quietly. Everything. Lila took a shaky breath. I didn't have anyone, she began. My parents died when I was 16, and I've been on my own ever since. I used to work 2 jobs just to pay rent. Last winter, things got worse. I lost my job at the cafe and couldn't afford to eat. One night, I sat by the bridge, thinking about ending it all. Her voice cracked. That's when your son stopped his car. Richard felt the air leave his lungs. He didn't know me, she went on, her eyes distant. He just got out of the car and asked if I was okay. I lied. But he didn't believe me. He said, nobody sits by the river this late unless they've lost something. Then he took me to a diner, bought me dinner, and made me promise I'd never give up on myself again. He gave me money, but I didn't take it. I told him I just needed a reason to live. And he said, she swallowed hard, he said, then live enough for both of us. Tears rolled down Richard's face before he even realized it. That sounded exactly like his son, always putting others before himself. Over the next weeks, Richard found himself unable to stop thinking about Lila. He learned she lived in a small, crumbling apartment near the city outskirts, working odd jobs and trying to continue her education. Something in him, maybe guilt, maybe love, made him start helping her quietly. He arranged for her to get a job at one of his company's offices without revealing his name. Every time he saw her, he felt a piece of Ethan's kindness living on in her eyes. But the truth, the one that shocked everyone, as the title says, was still waiting to surface. One evening, after months of quiet connection, Lila came to Richard's mansion. She stood at the grand doorway, nervous but determined. "Sir," she said softly, "there's something I need to tell you." "About Ethan." Richard's chest tightened. "What is it, Lila?" Her lips trembled. "I didn't just know him that night. We met again. Months later." Richard froze. "I didn't know he was your son," she continued quickly. "He found me again by accident. He was volunteering at a youth shelter, helping struggling students. He remembered me. We started talking, and then," her voice faded into silence. "And then?" Lila's eyes filled with tears. "We fell in love." Richard's mind spun. His son, his only son, had fallen in love with this girl, and never told anyone. Lila went on, her hands clutching each other tightly. "He didn't want to tell his family yet. He said he wanted to make sure I finished school first, that I wouldn't be seen as someone using him for money. He was so proud of you, Mr. Harlow. He said you were the strongest man he knew, even if he could never tell you that." Her voice broke again, and she sank into the couch, sobbing. "The night he died, he was coming to meet me. He was bringing flowers. He texted that he had something to tell me, that it was the best news ever. I waited for hours, but he never came." Richard closed his eyes. He remembered that night vividly, the police call, the hospital's sterile lights, the crushed car. For months, he had blamed himself for pushing Ethan too hard, for making him drive tired after work. Now he realized, his son had died trying to tell the girl he loved about their future. The truth spread quietly at first, through Richard's staff, then through the media. The billionaire's son had secretly loved a poor girl from the slums. And instead of anger, the world saw something beautiful in it. The story touched millions, reminding people that love sees no status, no wealth, no walls. But the most shocking part was still to come. 1 week after Lila's confession, she fainted during a visit to Ethan's grave. The doctors confirmed what no one expected: she was pregnant. Richard sat by her hospital bed in stunned silence, the doctor's words echoing in his ears. She was carrying his grandchild. At first, Richard didn't know what to do. His mind fought with his heart. The same world that praised Ethan's kindness would now judge the girl carrying his child. But when Lila woke up and whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to happen," something in Richard finally broke free. He took her hand and said, "No, Lila. You don't ever apologize for love. My son chose you. That's all that matters." From that day on, Richard treated her like family. He moved her into his home, not as a charity case, but as someone who carried the last piece of his son's soul. He sat by her side during every doctor's appointment, protected her from reporters, and even read to her from Ethan's childhood books, because it made her smile. Months later, when she gave birth to a baby boy, Richard wept like a child. The infant's eyes were the same soft gray as Ethan's. "His name," Lila whispered, "is Hope." Years passed. The mansion that once echoed with silence now rang with laughter again. Richard would sit in the garden, holding baby Hope in his arms, telling him stories about his father, the man who had saved a stranger's life, loved her without fear, and left behind a legacy far greater than money. When Hope grew old enough to walk, Richard brought him to Ethan's grave, where Lila stood beside him, smiling through tears. "Your daddy was a hero," she whispered to her son. "He taught us how to live with kindness, and that love never dies." Richard laid a hand on the gravestone and spoke softly, as though Ethan could hear him. "You didn't leave me, son. You just gave me a reason to live again." And that's the truth that shocked everyone, not just that a billionaire found a poor girl crying at his son's grave, but that she carried his son's legacy inside her. She was the bridge between grief and hope, between death and life. So if you're still listening, remember this: sometimes, the people we think are strangers are actually the ones sent to heal us. Sometimes, the greatest fortune isn't in wealth or power, it's in finding someone who helps us remember how to love again. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, because somewhere out there, someone just like Lila is waiting to be reminded that their story isn't over yet. Love doesn't ask for status. Kindness doesn't need recognition. And healing often comes from the most unexpected souls. Even in loss, life has a way of leading us to new beginnings, if we dare to keep our hearts open.